So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Bridie McGreavy today to you. Actually, I just realized she introduced me a little while ago, and I could get even by going on for the full hour, but I won't do that. There's a lot to like about Bridie in terms of the incredible dedication and skill she brings to her work, but I decided to just get it a little part of it because I think the rest will be evident to all of you. It's a common thing when you go to you're going to get like a graduate degree or a PhD and then go on and do something with it, that people tell you to kind of move away from your kind of home and go far away to get new ideas and new insights. And so, you grow up one place and you go to a school far away and do this. And I just want to say that Bridie broke all of those rules. She grew up in Brownfield, Maine. She was a Mitchell Scholar, this wonderful thing where Senator Mitchell has created a scholarship program for students to go from high school to college. So she went, you don't have to do that in Maine, but she went to Bates. She did at one point think about really test the idea of going far away, maybe like Stanford or Oxford or something. And she went as far away as Antioch, University of New England. Pretty close, it turns out. Then came back here for a PhD. I tell every PhD student who will listen to me, you got to leave that institution, go do a postdoc somewhere else. So like most people do, they ignored my advice, and she stayed right here and did a postdoc, and she's going to be talking about some of that. And then again, like, okay, you did a postdoc there, go get a job somewhere else. Ignored my advice, and actually was hired as a tenure-track assistant professor in the Communication and Journalism department at the end of a very competitive national search. So that wasn't a gift. She was a stellar candidate in a very tough field. She's now a co-principal investigator on a brand new $6 million NSF EPSCoR grant focused on the future of dams. That's not what she's going to talk about today. That's what she talked about on Friday down in New Hampshire when I was with her. And I'll just summarize that by saying, A, it probably shows you that you should ignore advice from people like me, whoever you are. But I can't remember the last time I've worked with someone who generates so many novel ideas, works so effectively at the interface between scholarly research and real-world practice, and especially is so deeply committed to finding a new way to create meaning in land-grant universities that were created 150 years ago to create value, to serve society, and to figure out what it means to do that kind of work 150 years later with the challenges we face in and beyond Maine. So welcome, Bridie.
Thank you for that introduction. I really appreciate it. And I've always felt that I'm from Maine. Why would you ever want to leave? Especially on the first day of snow. Yay. All right. And it's been a great honor and pleasure to have had such a long-standing relationship and partnership with the Mitchell Center and many of the researchers who come through and base their work here. And I appreciate the opportunity to share the research that I've been doing over the last year and a half as a postdoc with the New England Sustainability Consortium as part of the Safe Beaches and Shellfish Project. I think it was both Ruth and David prompted me to come up with a provocative title. So this is what I came up with, but I in no way want to imply that I think that water quality is an easy problem. I think that really this is a reflection of how much we've learned and how much we've come to begin to understand some of the complexity related to water quality issues in Maine and New England. So what I'm hoping to do today, or planning to do today, is contribute to an understanding of just how complex these issues are and tell what, in my view, has been an untold story of sustainability and human well-being in this context. So as I mentioned, this work has occurred as part of the New England Sustainability Consortium. The acronym is NEST. This was a 3-year, $6 million grant led by University of Maine and University of New Hampshire with a whole host of academic and stakeholder partners, some of whom are represented here in the logos that you see. The focus on NEST was to improve the use of science in decision-making for beach and shellfish management. One to acknowledge that what I'm about to share is really the result of an incredible collective effort to try and do this work of improving linking science with action. I want to acknowledge Tyler Quiring, who's in the back. He did a master's project and has been centrally involved with me in interviewing, doing participant observation, going out on the mudflat with harvesters, innovating around method, doing analysis, along with many other people. Can you raise your hand if you're on this list or should be on this list and I accidentally left you off? Yeah. So I see Kate's here, who's been very involved in doing spatial analysis. Sean's in the front. David, along with Kathleen Bell and Laura Lindenfeld, were the UMaine co-PIs on this project. So it's been incredibly interdisciplinary and dependent on a lot of different types of partnerships. So thank you all for being here and for your efforts for this. I organized my talk by 4 guiding questions. The first is just a brief introduction to the context for water quality and public health in coastal Maine, some of the issues that prompted this first project on NEST. Second is how, through sustainability science, do we address problems in this context? Talk about some of the research that we've been doing, both social and biophysical research, to understand the complexity of problems and the needs for problem solving. Third is what factors shape SES resilience to changes in water quality. If you've been coming to the talks recently, you'll recognize resilience as a really nice overarching theme that has connected. So Josh Stoll a couple of weeks ago was talking about resilience in his work in fisheries. Karen Wilson was here last week talking about resilience in the context of dams. So my definition of resilience is really similar to some of the ongoing discussions that we've had, and I'll talk more about that. And I'll conclude with just a brief note about how we're starting to try and solve some problems in this context and find ways to enhance resilience. So brief introduction to the context, and unfortunately, I have this video clip, and I'm still going to show the video clip, but the sound is not working. So I'll try and do like an embodied narration of what this actually is, because you do need the sound to have the full effect. This is a video clip that Tyler and I produced as part of research, our ethnographic research, to collect data in a whole variety of different ways. This is what we refer to as clam cam. And what we do is we ask harvesters to wear binaural microphones and a GoPro camera. And it's giving us an understanding of the practices of harvesting. And it's just also been a really fun project. But I shared this to start to give an embodied sense of this context and some of the work that occurs there. So you'll hear, if you had the sound, you'd hear the clinking of the hoe against the rocks, because this was a really rocky substrate that day. And at one point, the harvester makes a comment about how he much prefers to dig in soft mud, because the rocks are really hard digging. But the rocks can be a good place for clams to grow, because they create these perturbations that draws the clam seed down into the mud flat. So he's digging through the rocks. You can hear the clink of the clam as it goes into the hod. And we don't, when we're doing clam cam, we just say, you know, we want you to dig a hod full of clams. And we leave it up to the harvester to decide how they want that experience to go. And this harvester actually ended up narrating the entire dig. And at one point, I'll try and pick it out, make some comments that I want to come back to when I share some of what we're learning about resilience and vulnerability in this system. So at this point, he starts to describe the wiggling action through the mud. Talks about the grip on top of the hoe. At one point he hits a rock and he says, "This isn't for the lighthearted. It's hard on the whole body. The hands, the wrist, the neck and shoulders." And you can see it from the clam cam, this whole body experience. The bending, the kneeling, coming back up again, difficulty of the substrate. So I'm going to come back to this because it's been through this experience and many others that we've had that we've come to connect the physical practices of harvesting with resilience and vulnerability to water quality issues. So a little bit more about the context. Aside from this embodied context, there are approximately 1,700 licensed commercial clam harvesters in Maine. It's the second largest fishery, comprising 3% of the total fishery, but it's still the second largest, obviously dominated by lobsters, but still holding its own with $19 million in 2014. It's an interesting example of local governance because the shellfish resource is managed at the municipal level. So towns, if they choose to, will adopt an ordinance and set up a committee, and they make decisions about how to manage that resource and how to sustain it, how to do conservation closures and rotations, and how to limit or make decisions about the number of licenses that they want to offer. But it intersects with DMR's mandate to protect public health. And so it's what Eleanor Ostrom would refer to as a polycentric form of governance. It has these overlapping actors within this governance situation. And in addition to the economic and political context, clam harvesting in the state of Maine is incredible as a culture. It has rich meaning. So there are these stories of place. For example, the original name for Bar Harbor by the Wabanaki inhabitants referred to it as a clam gathering place. This harvester who we were out with on the mudflat that day, we asked him, what's your most memorable experience being out in the mud? And he talked in this one place, which we cannot reveal. We promised we would not reveal where this is. But in this one place, he was out at dawn, and the sun came up over the horizon. And at the moment that the sun came up over the horizon, all of the clams in the mud squirted at the same time, because clams squirt water out of their siphons. And the sun caught those geysers and created what he described as a diamond field across the mud. We hear these kind of stories all the time talking with harvesters. This is a noteworthy one, but it's one of many. In terms of the livelihood, it affords a measure of independence. These guys live by the tidal cycles, but the tide really is their only boss. And so they value that independence in their living. And it's also an important food source. It can be a sustainable and very healthy food source as well. And this, again, is where it intersects with DMR, because DMR is responsible for ensuring that it is safe as consumption. So the Maine Department of Marine Resources is responsible for protecting public health, and they take a precautionary approach to doing this. They have a couple of different types of closures related to persistent bacterial and chemical pollution. Along the coast of Maine, you have these longer-term closures. And as we've learned in our research, every closure has a unique history of how it became closed and how long it's been closed. And then you also have shorter-term closures that are usually related to what they call adverse events. So these are usually a rain event or some known event at a wastewater treatment plant. So these decisions about the long-term closures and the shorter-term closures affect approximately 215,000 acres of shellfish growing areas that are part of Maine DMR's purview. 186,000 of these growing areas are labeled as either prohibited or restricted. So these are the longer-term closures, and for the restricted closures, you can dig clams, but you have to deprate them. You have to send them through a filtration process. And then there are about 28,000 acres that come under conditional approval. So these are the ones that are subject to those adverse event closures. So when you have rain or wastewater treatment, they'll close those down. And both of these closure types have an impact on clam harvesters. It restricts their access to the resource. If you have a large amount of area, like in Frenchman Bay, we have 610 restricted acres and about 2,000 prohibited acres. So it narrows their ability to dig. And it also increases the uncertainty in their livelihood. So when you have these shorter term closures, they never really know when the closure is going to occur. So it introduces some real problems for them from an economic and also cultural standpoint. So within this context, as part of the New England Sustainability Consortium, we're doing sustainability science. We want to understand, how do we address problems? And address means two things. First, we need to understand what's really going on here from as many different perspectives as we can. And then address also means to try and develop solutions to these problems. If you've been coming to these, you may have seen this graphic before. This is a conceptual diagram that we've used to think about our work in sustainability science, which is really about solving problems through partnerships, with this key focus on linking science with different types of policy decision-making, policy writ large in this sense. And this occurs through this process of defining problems together, bringing multiple disciplinary perspectives to bear on those problems, conducting research, implementing different types of solutions. But I think the key thing here, one of the reasons I always use this diagram, you've seen me use it I think probably 4 times in the last couple of weeks, is this iterative quality to it. That sustainability science is a commitment to learning, to innovating, and to this ongoing capacity building. There's a lot to be said for that capacity building. It's part of the reason I've dug my heels in. It's tried to stay in Maine, because you build a lot of capacity over time. So within the New England Sustainability Consortium, we have several different research areas, but I think we can broadly conceptualize the research on NEST as occurring, as focused on understanding the dynamics of the social ecological system, and then also the knowledge system, and connecting those pieces. And this is a framing that we've really carried forward in the Future of Dams project, understanding we've refined through NEST and are really working on in the Future of Dams. And my research as a postdoc necessarily was cutting across both of these areas, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. How many of you have worked in a large-scale, interdisciplinary, collaborative type of project? Like a lot of different, show of hands, okay. So I would imagine that if you've worked in this type of setting before, you'll be familiar with some of the challenges. And part of the challenge stems from trying to find ways to effectively bring difference together, different types of knowledge, different ways of knowing, different perspectives and values. And there are many different ways we might be able to visualize this kind of interdisciplinary work, this integrative work that we try and do in sustainability science. But this is one that I came across at a resilience conference that I went to in France 2 years ago. It's by Maria Tango and others who are associated with the Stockholm Resilience Center. And one of the things I like about it is that it resists this common trope that I often hear in sustainability work or these collaborative works, that we need to find common ground, that we need to get on the same page and all come to a shared understanding, which we do need to do some of that, but at the same time, it's about maintaining the difference. It's about harnessing that creative potential in the difference. So I think that's a really effective visualization of how we bring different disciplinary perspectives to bear to create an enriched picture of a complex situation. And it's in our practices of working across or working through this enriched picture, sharing it with each other, that's where the integration happens. And it then continues to feed back into the ongoing development of our research, the development of the policies that we want to produce, formation of our partnerships. So it's difference that makes more difference. And so it really works for me as a visual model for the kind of work that we've been doing in NEST. One of the strategies that we've used on NEST is the active use of boundary objects. Boundary objects are things like maps, visual images, technical reports, these strategic devices that allow us to identify our differences and find ways to work across those differences. So they're entities that clarify at the same time, they help us produce some level of understanding each other, help us develop relationships. So this is a conceptual framework that we developed as a boundary object as part of NEST. And I know that you can't see all of those little pieces, but the development of this helped us as a group start to clarify our respective pieces of the research. It helped me situate myself as a postdoc working in this context and identify the different strands of research that I would then produce on it. And we had multiple rounds of developing this. Kevin, David, Laura, and others led it, Kathleen. got feedback from the team. And over time, I located myself by focusing on these components as they're described in the framework, focusing on harvesters, agency representatives, coastal communities, primarily shellfishing communities, wanting to understand culture, meanings, relationships, institutional factors that shaped the practices of these folks in that context, and then ultimately focused on resilience, human well-being, coping, and adaptation. So this helped me locate and develop these research objectives where I was seeking to understand and enhance resilience of harvesters, shellfishing communities, regulators, and managers to changes in water quality. This is something that LaBelle and others in 2006 emphasized. You need to understand the resilience of what to what. And I think that's going to Josh's point that you were making about the distinction between a general form of resilience and a specified resilience. This is still trying to have a more general quality to it, but it is specifying for public health, ecosystem sustainability, economic vitality, and human well-being. So I understand resilience as the ability of a system to absorb change, but also dynamically respond change, to either maintain an identity or, when necessary, transform. So advance these objectives through an overarching ethnographic methodology, again, working in social ecological systems work and also knowledge systems. So in terms of contributing to the enriched understanding of the social ecological system, my research occurred within Frenchman Bay, where I did a cross-case comparison of 3 different municipal management contexts. I conducted interviews with clam diggers, related managers and regulators, 25, observations at more than 50 events, including shellfish committee meetings, going out on the mudflat with harvesters, work that I was doing with the Frenchman Bay Partners as an organization, their key stakeholder group here, and then Tyler and I have been working on Clam Cam. In terms of the knowledge system, I conducted interviews with researchers who are involved in NEST, core partners and stakeholders who have been involved in helping us identify the needs and develop solutions. And then, in addition to dozens of informal stakeholder meetings, I've helped set up formal stakeholder meetings for those partners who need to be more involved in the development of the research, to be able to feed back, to ask questions of it, and help shape it actively, because they are the ones who ultimately will use these products that we're developing that I'm going to talk about. So across these, I've done 64 interviews. Thematic analysis, I would say preliminary thematic analysis. This is ongoing, given that I have really just wrapped this up and I'm just now getting into the analysis. But I'm far enough along that I've identified some key themes that I think will be a starting point for conversation for us at the end. I'm going to highlight factors then identified across both of these SES and KS research efforts that shape SES resilience to changes in water quality. I've identified 3 key factors. The first one is about governance, source detection, and mitigation of long-term closures. The second one is related to uncertainty and needs for information and decision-making about adverse rain events. And then the third one is about individual and community capacity to respond to changes in water quality. So this first one is exemplified by this quote here. This is from a representative at DMR. She said, "Hugely important river, one of the top 5 producers in the state, 180 people employed, and so we've been working with Waldoboro for a year and a half trying to find out what's going wrong with the water quality in the Madonic." And it finally dawned on me. I'm like, there's no incentive for DEP to go after this, because it's classified as EPA Class A or whatever the best class is. Not only is there no incentive, but they're not even sure what jurisdiction they would do it under. It's not part of their authority. Unless we come up with a smoking gun, or the town comes up with a smoking gun with an illegal discharge or something, it's hard for them to do anything. So I'm thinking, well, my God, what do I do then? You know, where do you go? The real complexity related to the governance across these agencies. This is a simplified diagram of some of the issues related to these longer-term closures when a mudflat is downgraded from conditionally approved to either restricted or prohibited. So you have routine water testing, at least 6 water quality tests a month in these areas. And if you get water tests that start to show fecal coliforms above 31 coliform fecal units per 100 milliliters, it's a 90th percentile measure, then they will close it. And when there's a closure in place, DMR will generally go out and conduct a hotspot survey. If they can identify the problem, which is in no way, shape, or form a guarantee they'll be able to do that, they then submit a problem form to the town. And that's where their enforcement authority ends. It then is taken up by the code enforcement officer or the local plumbing inspector. It's an important distinction. It's not licensed plumbing inspector, depending on who that person is in the municipality, and they oftentimes wear multiple hats, and or the Department of Environmental Protection in some situations, not all situations. And a problem form goes to the Department of Health and Human Services, the one state plumbing inspector for the entire state. None of these entities share office space, so that's a barrier right there of just regularly exchanging information. The problem forms kind of get lost in the process. It takes DMR up on these time and time again, but this is further complicated because in the case of a code enforcement officer addressing this, they then have to work, they get their priorities from the select board. So the select board first and foremost needs to support enforcement in this way, but then they would work with landowners. In Hancock County, you're working in a situation with relatively low median income. So if you have a $3,000 to $5,000 septic replacement, that can be very difficult. These are small towns where enforcing somebody to change or fix their septic is not always an easy thing for people to do. So you can see that just in this one example, there are some real challenges related to governance, source detection, and mitigation. The second factor is related to uncertainty and needs for information about adverse events. And this is another person who is based at DMR. And she said, it became a pretty complex system. It was 3 years ago we started work to come together kind of informally here at DMR. A coworker and I were like, how do we make this more predictable? And then how do we take the individual element out of this? Meaning like, for every rain event, you have, it's an individual event. And make it more of a baseline of low, medium, high. We don't really need quantitative results. We need management trigger levels. And we need something to go by that's simple and logical and can be predictable in the end for industry. So the low, medium, and high risk areas. So we took that previous diagram in response to this need for information on NEST, and we did this to it, making it slightly more complex, but in a way that was necessary, because as we tried to respond to this need for information, we recognized it was important to bring multiple disciplinary perspectives to bear on this, including spatial analytics led by Kate and Frank, hydrogeomorphology focusing on water sources and delivery, Sean and his students, Damian Brady and Kelly, based at the Darling Marine Center, focused on tidal modeling, had Steve Jones and Jane Disney, and working with John Peckinham, focused on microbiology, and then also social scientists who were studying some of the social dimensions related to this and identifying partnership needs and preferences to try and pull these pieces together so that we would meet needs for information in ways that worked for people, so that they can trust the science that we produced and that they were involved in ways that set them up to understand it and make it most applicable to their decision making. So this is a ternary diagram that Sean Smith developed that has become another boundary object on our project. So going back to the medomic, part of the challenge there is that, and this is, I'm quoting Sean, I'm quoting you directly almost, they don't fully know, is it a source problem, is it a residence time problem, is it a delivery problem, some combination of those factors. So this was a way of trying to understand the relationships between these different watershed characteristics, combining a focus on pollution sources and rain events, tidal patterns and estuary characteristics, and drainage. And each of these nodes involves different disciplinary perspectives. In terms of the knowledge system then, what we're trying to do is understand information sources and needs. So we were able to finesse this so that sources, delivery, and residence time gives us a heuristic for thinking about how do we feed our information into the development of this research, partnership preferences, iterative feedback and change, so that in the center of this we're creating what we call a co-production space. I'm going to come back to what is coming out of the co-production space, which I think will make all of this make a little bit more sense. The third factor is about individual and community capacity to respond to change. So one of the ways we've organized our research on NEST is at two scales. We have research that's going on at a coastwide scale, and we have research that's going on in what we call reference watersheds. And Elizabeth Maxwell, who's here, has been working with Teresa Johnson to understand shellfish management at a coastwide scale. And they've been able to identify, for example, when there's a rain event, harvesters have diverse other sources of income that help them respond. I've been doing work largely at the reference site scale, ethnographic work, and I think our insights really create an enriched picture of the many different types of social factors that do influence harvesters as they respond to rain events. I'm going to come back to this idea that clam digging is hard on the body. We heard this from many harvesters. We've experienced it ourselves, heard about it from people who have worked with harvesters in a management context, and it's very real and it has consequences. So this is from a quote with a shellfish harvester. He says, "I go to a chiropractor once a month, and when I walked into his office for the first time, my neck was so screwed up, I was ready to put a bullet in my head. I mean, I couldn't move my head like that much. I use a traction device to stretch my neck because it's certain ways of bending over your neck and stuff like that. And digging, it's the same repetition, rowing a canoe or what have you. All that stresses certain upper body areas." So we're hearing across harvesters that it's this region that really, and the lower back, that takes a toll. This harvester in particular ended up having another injury, was prescribed pain pills, got addicted to the pain pills. The injury was so bad he wasn't able to continue digging. He ended up dealing and then ended up spending 5 years in jail. And unfortunately, this is a pattern in this community of seeking treatment for the chronic pain and then getting hooked on the prescription pills and leading to other types of opiate use. So you see this with another harvester. I asked, "What were you on?" He said, "Everything I could get my hands on. Heroin at the end of the, how long have you been clean? 6-7 years without heroin. I did methadone for 1.5 years and then I quit that. It's even worse than the heroin itself." Methadone is? It is, yeah. In what way? It's worse. Just because a doctor made it, there's more chemicals in there than there is the heroin. And to come off it, I was 3 months of, well, it put me in the hospital, heart shut down, everything. It's an evil drug. Taught me one thing, never to touch it again. I'll stick to my pot. I got medical marijuana, and I think that's a lot better version. He goes on. I asked, "How did you get into drugs in the first place?" He said, "Just life in general in Maine. Not a lot to do. I've dug all my life. I had a lot of money when I was a kid. Went from one thing to another, bad decisions. We work our bodies pretty hard. The drugs for me started when I got in a boat accident. He was a scallop fisherman, and I fell off a pier. Said oxy was a miracle cure. I've never touched a pill before then, and then the doctors take them away. What are you going to do, you know?" So as I started to hear these types of stories, I started formally and informally asking a lot of people who have been working in the shellfishing communities in a variety of different ways. And consistent, and I would also say conservative estimates, are that 10 to 20% of harvesters are addicted to some form of opiate, whether it's prescription pain pills or heroin. This is qualitative, but this is the general range that keeps coming up. And if you've been paying attention to the news at all, you'll see that this is really a reflection of a much bigger problem, and one that is right here in Maine. So this is from the Portland Press-Herald yesterday, and this is a former state trooper on the front cover. He says, "I didn't look like an addict," and he goes on to say, the staff writer describes, Bailey's prescription to heroin journey has become the path thousands of others in Maine have also taken. It's the number one reason heroin has become so prevalent in Maine, health experts say. Maine's prescribing rates for opiates most likely to be abused are the highest in the nation. And so he was talking about how he had an injury on the job, and that was his entry into this addiction. So you can see that we're in a state context where we're particularly vulnerable. And I would argue that what's going on in the shellfishing industry seems like it's also going on in other fisheries as well. So then how does this connect back to water quality as a problem? It's a problem in and of itself, but it also does connect within this social ecological system. At the individual level, the harvesters who are addicted to drugs are the ones who are most vulnerable to the adverse events because they're the ones who don't have a savings to fall back on. So when you have a 2-week closure, they're the ones who are struggling. I'm just beginning, and I don't know that I'll ever come to a full understanding of some of the other consequences of that, but I have questions about other types of illegal activity that might be happening when you do have a closure and they're just scraping by, thefts and things like that. But there are also impacts on community resilience, given that this is a context where you have shared decision making around how you manage the resource. It fundamentally affects the capacity to have that shared management. I'm now, knowing how persistent this is and what a problem it is, I'm having to reinterpret observations I've made over the last several years of things that have gone on at shellfish meetings that I'm reconsidering through this lens. People who come to meetings incapacitated, and I think that can, in some cases, fuel conflict. But then there's this other dimension where you have recovering addicts who are making a living on the tide, they're digging clams, but they don't have the same kind of standing as the other harvesters in the community. And so there's a form of social exclusion that's going on, I think could potentially be fueling additional conflict in these settings. And again, I'm just beginning to understand some of those relationships. So then how do we enhance resilience? Just want to highlight 3 key things that we've been doing on NEST to address these 3 factors that I identified. I'm not going to talk at length about this one. I do have a poster in the hall, but in terms of addressing the governance, source detection, and mitigation of long-term closures, the 610 project has been an ongoing effort. There's an outgrowth of the Frenchman Bay Partners work that I did as part of my dissertation, where we identified these breaks in communication among state agencies, DMR, DEP, different nonprofit organizations, to understand, well, here you have a closed flat. How do you open it up? What do you do? And we heard early on from the harvesters, when it comes to closed clam flats, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. And so we worked to really understand some of those breakages, and we've had great success. We've actually opened up 100 acres, 2 different mudflat areas that we identified as part of our early priority list. And we've had improved communication between agencies, improved information sharing, improved relationship development, improved archiving of the history of decision making. So happy to talk more about that if you have questions about it. And again, the poster is just down the hall. The second thing in terms of uncertainty and needs for information about adverse events, so going back to this co-production space, one of the things that we identified in working with DMR and Maine Healthy Beaches is we want to develop decision support system. And we have a meeting tomorrow to get some preliminary feedback about this, but we think there will be at least 4 key parts. We've already worked to compile data sets. We have a good understanding of what could we do in future to fill some of the data gaps that would be ideal to have in the state data set. We think that we'll be able to provide some kind of models drawn from the respective efforts on this research project. And then this is again coming from Sean's work to identify these landscape response units that would help DMR identify and make decisions in these low, medium, and high-risk areas to improve the predictive capacity and ultimately to open flats sooner if they can be opened sooner. And then the third factor in terms of individual and community capacity, one of the things I'm just trying to do initially is raise awareness and find ways to address misperceptions about opiate addiction. This summer, I worked with the Maine Migrant Health Program. They were doing a needs assessment to understand health-related needs in fishing communities. And so we helped them set up a method for reaching out to shellfishermen and understanding. They weren't focused on drugs, but they were exploring how they might take this mobile health unit that they developed working with blueberry farmers and do something similar with fishermen. And this is a connection that Linda helped me make. She's very involved in this organization. And then another connection that Linda helped me make, here's another pattern, is to start thinking about ergonomics. Because my go-to is to think, well, how do you help people get off drugs and get the kind of treatment that they need? But kind of before that, how can we think about improving or reducing the physical strain and toll on harvesters' bodies? So just starting to talk with a researcher at UMass Lowell, Scott Fulmer, who's has expertise in ergonomics and has worked in fishing communities, and we're exploring just in early stages funding through the New England Center for Occupational Health and Safety. So I wanted to leave about 15 minutes or so with the hope that I'm happy to answer questions, but I would love to talk about, brainstorm around different things that we might be able to do to address some of these issues, continue to address these issues. So thank you. Did you have questions? Yeah.
Yeah, so when we were launching this sustainability science work here many years ago, Bob Cates, one of the people you cited, who was the senior author of a big paper in Science in 2001 that kind of framed this new field, often kind of complained, I think he probably was complaining about us, but a lot of others too, that sustainability science, if it's this meeting of kind of people who broadly do sort of environmental science and people who are focused on human well-being, that it's usually dominated by the environmental end of the spectrum. And he thought that was true of our work. And I thought he was right. When I looked around the room, I'm in environmental science, lots of people were, and I often found myself wondering what that was about.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems, so for example, I don't know a lot about the expertise needed to tackle the human well-being part, but you could argue that a big chunk of it, you wish the audience was full of people who do social work or something like that. But that isn't exactly who comes here, and so maybe it looks like you're getting good at kind of thinking about that and reaching out to people that are working on this in other ways. And I will say that Linda's helped me think a lot about this in terms of her own experiences. But what is this? What's your view for this project and more broadly for sustainability science?
For having
bring
a
those together
really integrated approach.
Yeah, as opposed to kind of, it strikes me that when we wrote that proposal, there was nothing in it about these kinds of human well-being issues, right?
Yeah.
You kind of found them.
Yeah.
But we had no problem listing all the environmental stuff we could think of. So that's what I think.
Yeah. Part of it, I mean, as a communication scholar, my immediate go-to is to think about kind of the discourse and who's defining the terms for the type of research that we do and where our funding comes from and the different disciplines who are engaged at what stages in forming the concept. So I think that's a big part of what was going on with SSI, and but a key part of it too is then paying attention to how then can you change through communication. Like, we're not in a lock-in, you know. We can find those windows of opportunity for shifting the discourse, right? Bringing new people into the fold and then feeding back so that we can change the broader system of power that ultimately makes decisions about, you know, the funding priorities and those kinds of things. But yeah, I think it is being mindful that we have some constraints. We're living in a history of intellectual thought that's going to guide us in different directions, and we need to remain open to changing when we identify something as pressing as what you've identified here. It's not a perfect answer, yes, but yeah.
There tends to be, I think, like tension between people who make a living in extractive industries like logging and fishing, and then the sort of scientific community, and both sides don't trust each other.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, so 2 questions. Did you find this to be an issue with the claimers? And did you guys make any sort of attempt to bring those people together to sort of build trust between the regulators and the regulatees?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really great question. So, in terms of the research that I've been doing as a social scientist there, it has taken me a long time to develop trust with this community. I was talking about the work I've been doing as NEST, but it was an outgrowth of dissertation research. So I've been working in these communities since 2011, and it's really just been in the last year that they started to tell me these types of stories. So at an individual level, yes, as an individual scientist, it has taken time and just showing up again and again and trying to support their efforts. I think part of the distrust, at least from the kind of science stakeholder side, is what Linda has referred to as a helicopter approach. We come in, do our studies, extract knowledge, and then move away. And when you see people, or when harvesters and others in the industry see people coming back again and again, meaningfully trying to support, that helps build the trust. Tyler and I are also working on some research that demonstrates the importance of actually physically going out on the mudflat together. So this is something that DMR does consistently. So DMR, although they're a regulatory agency, they do some pretty innovative things to build relationships with shellfish fishermen. One is the area biologists regularly go to the shellfish meetings, show up on the committee's terms, and they also go out on the mud. There is real communication that happens materially in the mud. And we've also learned that we have to have the right footwear. We can stand out as not being from there if we're not prepared. Yeah, going out on the mudflat has certainly been important for me, and I think it is for DMR as well. Yeah.
Right. So when I was thinking about these stories and your research, when I was growing up, sort of my friends were in the law school, and clammers were a really lower class,
Mm-hmm.
a lot lower class. We didn't really talk about sort of this pre-existing class system that you get yourself into and how that affects all of the other things that happen.
Mm-hmm. Between the different fisheries? Yeah, that I haven't been focused on that. I think there is a real need, and I'm trying to remember if you made this point in your talk about multi-species research programs, so that we're understanding interactions between lobster fishing, clam harvesters, worm harvesters, other fisheries as well. One of the questions I've had, and Elizabeth, we should follow up about this at some point, see if you're seeing a similar trend, is I've wondered about as it seems like we'll have declining lobster stocks given the changes in ocean temperature and shell disease and things like that. Is there going to be a kind of power grab? Is there going to be a transition so that lobster fishermen who do generally make more money and have potentially access to greater resources then move into shell fishing? I don't know that that's going to happen, but I think that there are some interesting questions there, and have heard anecdotal stories about lobster fishermen getting positions on clam committees as kind of a backup. Again, I don't know if that's the case, but it speaks to the need to understand some of these hierarchies and how it shapes the range of management practices across the coast. Chase.
I'm trying to think how to word this, but speaking of like hierarchies, so I don't know what like the hierarchy is with like the management of the fisheries. Like, so you said you spoke with like the diggers themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Did you speak to anyone? And I don't know if they're even our people, but did you speak to anyone who was like sort of managing them, like at the higher upper level kind of thing? And, like, did they have anything to say? I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I just briefly mentioned this cross-case comparison that I was doing in Frenchman Bay. So there are 3 very different approaches to municipal shellfish management in Frenchman Bay. So you have Bar Harbor. There are 4 total diggers, and the committee is all non-harvesters. the Frenshman Bay Regional Shellfish Committee is made up of 7 towns in Frenshman Bay, and all of the harvesters all the committee members are harvesters. And then the third one is Gouldsboro, and there are about 25 active harvesters in Gouldsboro, and it's a mix of a couple of harvesters. The shellfish warden actually has an important role in the committee, and then lobster fishermen and worm digger and other community members. In the Frenshman Bay Regional Shellfish Committee, it's not necessarily that this like extension board is called Municipal Joint Board is a management entity for that committee, but they do have a level of authority over the harvesters, because the harvesters in that situation, when they want to make a decision about a change in the licensing or change in the conservation closure or the rotation or something like that, they then have to go to the Municipal Joint Board. Municipal Joint Board is made up of different representatives from the Select Board. And I did interview, trying to remember, at least 2, possibly 3 members, and Tyler's nodding in the back, of the Municipal Joint Board. I haven't gone enough, I haven't done enough analysis on those and to look at that specific question, but one of the things that I have noticed as the Municipal Joint Board members, I reached out to them because there was a part of the governance issue in Frenshman Bay in this particular situation was that the Frenshman Bay Regional Shellfish Committee was making decisions, and those decisions were not getting conveyed to the joint board because none of the members of the joint board were actually coming to the meetings. They were really disconnected. And so at least one member now comes on a more regular basis, and he seems to have a good relationship with the harvesters and demonstrates respect. I think that varies, and it is in part depends on, I think, in part, whether or not they themselves have dug clams for a living. That seems to produce an identification and possibly more relationality between the two.
Well, if you have more questions for Bridie, please come on up. Let's thank her again.
Yeah.